Hello and welcome to the next episode of the podcast on negotiation. Today with a very special guest, Keld Jensen, a Danish-American who has joined us to talk about the fundamentals, the essentials, and of course his new book, which has the same title. Keld, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
With pleasure. So for those of you guys, there are a couple of my bachelor students will be joining our today's podcast live. So for you guys, Keld is an absolute expert in the area of negotiation. He's dealt with this topic for almost 3 decades. Keld has written many books, is a very successful author, best-selling author. A professor, teaches many universities, and based in California. Keld, did I forget anything?
No, you got the main part.
Alrighty, Keld. So let's start with the essentials. Yeah, if you were to extract 3 most important aspects, essentials, fundamentals of negotiation, if you were to suppose you probably offer lots of trainings, multiple days, squeeze them into 3 things, what would they be?
Well, that's a tough question that you're starting with here, Remy, because I think that, first and foremost, we could spend days just talking about this topic here. And I hope we can make it exciting and enjoyable as well. Let me just take one step back. When I got the idea with McGraw-Hill, my publisher, to do this book, I haven't actually done a book since 2017. And I thought I was done with it. But I had to talk with McGraw-Hill, and they actually said, we need to create a book about the essentials in negotiation. And I was sitting thinking there for a couple of weeks, what is essentials in negotiation? Because there's so many different topics. And actually, I find most of them to be essentials. If you really start thinking about it, you have everything from communication to nonverbal language to techniques to mathematical to, well, the whole drill. So there's actually so many things. And when you want to jam all of that into one book in 280 pages, that is actually somewhat of a challenge. Now, in my world, if I should name 3 things, strategy is one of them. And funny enough, a lot of my colleagues out in the world is not really spending too much time on a strategy. And in my work, I run a consultancy company as well on the side, and we advise both major corporations and government on negotiations. And I always start off with a new client asking them, could I please have a look at your official negotiation strategy in your organization? And the answer to that question, Remy, is typically silence. And then some of them goes, because they have no idea what I'm talking about. And then I asked them, do you have a communication strategy? Then they acknowledge they have that. And then I said, do you have a go-to-market strategy? They got that. Do you have a research and development strategy? Do you have this strategy? Oh, they have got all these strategies because they went to business school. So they learned to do all of these strategies, right? But the negotiation strategy is non-existing. So back to your question, 3 things. One of them is we need to have a negotiation strategy. And in the book, by the way, we dive into what is a negotiation strategy. I can't tell anybody what is the right strategy for them, but I can offer them the tools so they can create a strategy. That's one thing. The second thing that is really important to me is trust. And to me, all business is human. That means that I don't believe that organizations are negotiating with each other. I don't believe that companies or governments are negotiating with each other. I believe that it is people that are negotiating with each other. So that means if you replace one individual in an organization with another one, you might be more or less successful in your negotiation. You might fail or you may succeed.
True.
And one of the key things when we talk about relationship between people is likability and trust, right? So it's all down to trust. And when I started talking about trust many years ago, I remember in the beginning, people looking at me thinking, you're a bit crazy. That's fluffy thing, trust. It's not very tangible. It's not measurable. So I actually spent the last 10, 12, 15 years just finding a way to capitalize trust, because you can't get the awareness of the C-suite in any organization if you can't capitalize it. So trust, and we have actually renamed it into trust currency. We just took the 2 names, trust and currency, put them together, because trust is a monetized variable that you have to focus on. So that would be the second one. And the last one, the third one, if I should name 3, is a concept that I coined, that is negoeconomics. And negoeconomics is really just negotiation economics. And to summarize very quickly, it is a mathematical model that has been awarded that basically identified that we have an unrealized value of up to 42% in most commercial negotiation. So that means if you and I were sitting here negotiating, Remy, right now, and we reach an agreement, we shake hands, we sign the contract, we're very happy, and then we leave the meeting, we may have, without knowing it, left up to 42% on the table, which is necroeconomics, the asymmetric value between your cost and my value, or my cost and your value. That was a very long answer to your question, Remy, but that's basically the three things. So strategy, trust, and negoeconomics.
Negoeconomics, yes. I'm very curious about the dependence between strategy and negoeconomics. To what extent do they influence each other, and to what extent one is a precondition for the other?
A great question. They are very dependent on each other. Now, when we talk strategy, we could divide strategy into, as you know as well, into positional negotiation or collaborative negotiation. Positional negotiation, or we could call it a zero-sum negotiation, as I'm sure most of our listeners know, means that I win at your expense or you win at my expense. When we're talking about utilizing necroeconomics, that is basically impossible in a positional-orientated negotiation because it requires transparency, openness, honesty, and trust. You know, we cannot work efficiently with necroeconomics if we don't have these four things in place. So one of the things we need to do in order to be successful, capitalizing that up to 42%, is we actually have to negotiate on how to negotiate before we start negotiating. I know it sounds weird, but if we just meet each other for the first time and we just dive straight into negotiation, you might perceive negotiation like playing chess, and I may perceive negotiation like playing tennis. And it's going to be a really fun negotiation, isn't it? Because I'm sitting there with a racket, just throwing it around in the air, and you're sitting there moving your chess pieces around. And communication, obviously, you can imagine, is not working very well. So we need to identify first and foremost, are we going to negotiate like playing chess or like playing tennis, just to give you a picture on that. So basically, we have to address, are we going to dive into zero-sum or collaborative negotiation? And obviously, you need to put some more words on that, all more explained in the book as well. But you need to do that and create and agree on that strategy before you can move into necroeconomics. So it's a wonderful question because the strategy choice in being successful in necroeconomics is essential.
Keld, thank you so much for your answer. We apparently have hit the spot because we're already getting the first questions, follow-up questions to your answers. So Shihab, all the best here. Best greetings to Cairo and Alexandria, to Egypt. So an organization should have a generic negotiation strategy, ? Or does it exist for a special negotiation case by case? What do you think, Keld?
That is a great question. Let me explain it this way. A model I created is called the SAM model, Strategy Assessment Metrics. And it basically measures your counterpart, the importance of the counterpart to you, and how important you are to the counterpart. So look at this quadrant where we have a horizontal line and a vertical line. Now, the horizontal line is how important you are to your counterpart. The vertical line explains how important the counterpart might be to you. So it's pretty easy. If both parties identify they're equally important to each other, we end up on the top right corner. If we're on the top right corner, the strategy is collaboration. End of story. Not using collaboration up there is, and I'm sorry to be very direct, unintelligent, - stupid. Because if you're working long-term, if you're depending on each other and you're important for each other, why on earth are you working in a zero-sum approach? And by the way, that happens all the time, despite that you are important to each other and you're working long-term. On the other hand, if you're in a commodity market where you are not important to the counterpart and the counterpart is not important to you, there might be hundreds of suppliers and hundreds of customers and you're just buying a standard product. Well, perhaps you should purposely choose to be in a zero-sum game. So I'm not sitting here preaching that everything around the world should be collaborative all the time. What I'm saying is you have to be conscious what negotiation you are in, what your counterpart is, and how your counterpart views you. Unfortunately, Remy, you probably experienced that too. There are too many negotiators who just stumble into a negotiation and accidentally end up in collaboration or zero-sum. They haven't actually thought through the strategy. What is it we need to do? What is the market like? What is the counterpart? What position are we in? Blah, 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 and all those things. So just getting back to the question here, which is a wonderful question. The organization in general from C-suite level should identify a strategy. What is it we want to do as an organization? Way too often I see when I step into an organization that procurement is doing zero sum and sales love collaboration. And they're just acting like that completely night and day. And the organization have to identify a strategy. But having said that, of course, you have to break that strategy down to market, individual negotiation. So you should have an overall strategy, but you should also have a plan B and C and D. So how do you want to act in different occasions? But every single individual in the organization needs to know what is our official negotiation strategy. Being trained in that, understand that, and work with those tools accordingly.
Thank you so much, Keld. We got two more questions, or many more questions on strategy and dependency between trust and nego economics. Here we go. Joanna, Keld, where can we read more about nego economics?
That almost sounds like a planned question that is sponsored, because I have a new book that is coming out. Yes, nego economics. Google it first and foremost. There's a lot of free stuff out there. Both YouTube have lots of video explaining nego economics. Just Google the term. You can read a lot about it if you want it for free. And Negotiation Essentials have a whole chapter just dedicated to how to work with nego economics.
Great. And we already got some praise for nego economics from Eleni from Greece, yes, who claims that it had changed her perspective. All right, let's move on. Let's move on with some of the questions that we've planned for today, and that is, your book begins with a discussion on, which is extremely close to my heart, discussion on greatness in negotiation.
Right.
Yes, and another unfair question from me. I will ask you to summarize it, right? You wrote 10, 20 pages on greatness in negotiation. And then this this guy asked me to summarize it in, again, 3 main characteristics or 3 main traits of great negotiators. But would you take a shot at it?
Yeah, sure. I can try. And again, it's a dangerous minefield to get into, because who am I to define what is greatness in negotiation? I mean, you know, there are different ways, but I tried. If I should define a great negotiator, it is one who is capable and competent in listening. Key thing. You really need to be able to listen. And when I say that, you know, everybody always nod their head and said, oh, yes, listening is very important. But what I often get is that people are not really listening. They are listening so they can reply. So when you ask the question, I already start thinking about what should my reply be to Remy's question, instead of actually listening to what you're saying. So let me give you a quick example. If we're negotiating and you come to me and say, I would like to change delivery time by 2 weeks, then as a human being, I will often start thinking, am I able to do that? Will it cost me anything? Don't I want to do that? Should I ask for something in return? And all of that is really, sorry for my English, really BS, because instead I should counter that question with another question saying, what is the value to you, Remy, if we move that delivery time? Because this is really listening. I have to listen between the lines, between the words. What is it you're really saying? And when you're asking for something, you're only asking for something because it has a value to you. That's the only reason we do commercial negotiation, because there's a value. Now, if I am a good partnership negotiator, which is how we define working in a very collaborative negotiation mode, if I'm in partnership and being a great negotiator, I can identify myself as a great negotiator if I leave that negotiation knowing your value by changing that delivery time. If I leave that negotiation and have no clue if you have a value and have no clue about what that value might be, I have failed as a great negotiator. So think about it this way. If the counterpart is saying something, replace the sound of the words with the sound of a cash register, because you only voice something in a negotiation if you have an interest. So when you say something, we would like to change terms of payment, delivery time, increase efficiency level, whatever. It means something for you. So a great negotiator, one of the many things is you listen, you really listen, and you ask questions. Another thing I would say, just to summarize that big question you're asking me here, is knowing your variables. And a variable is obviously everything that is negotiable. So it could be quality, delivery time, warranty, blah, blah, blah. You have hundreds and hundreds of variables. And just to sum it up, I would say in general, I'm generalizing, majority of negotiators, organizations, and governments are negotiating on too few variables. They're negotiating on the usual suspects, like the typical 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's it.
Same here. This is also my experience. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. We were sitting with a major energy corporation recently, and they were negotiating on 9 commercial variables. So we did a brainstorming session with them. We were sitting down for a day, and we ended up with 72 variables, where they implemented 26 of them and improved their profit to a quite high level. So what I'm just saying is that a great negotiator is not only able to identify more variables, they're also able to quantify the value of that variable. And we need to be able to do that as well. Sorry, just to throw in another example, but I'm quite often working with procurement, right? And I had a procurement officer recently who said, we would like to get a longer line of credit from our supplier. And I said, well, perhaps that's a good idea. What is the financial benefit for you by doing that? And then he looked at me and said, I have no idea. And then I said, why on earth do you want to do it then? Because he said, that will be cool. And I said, but are you stupid or what? Because just extending that line of credit is going to hurt your counterpart. And if his cost of capital is higher than your cost of capital, it doesn't make sense. So back to what I said, obviously this wasn't a great negotiator, because then you're thinking things through and you're going to ask questions instead. I'm going to wrap it up quickly, because again, it was a big question you were asking about what defines a great negotiator. Preparation goes without saying. Knowing how to prepare is part of it. And then having a strategy. So if I should just list 4 or 5 things, that would be the 4 or 5 things that would clearly identify a great one in negotiation compared to a less great negotiator.
Thank you, Keld. We're going to come back to the topic of greatness at the end of our chat. This is always my last question to all my guests. But already now, a quick commercial break to those of you guys who are listening and are passionate about negotiation. We have a negotiation competition coming up for professionals. And you are more than welcome to register. If you're interested, go to www.professionals.thenegotiationchallenge.org. And already now I can tell you that this year we will have teams from almost on all continents, still waiting for Africa, but we have Americas, we have Europe, we have Asia, we have Australia already. And we so much look forward to having you guys with us. Don't be afraid. This is necessary on the path to mastery. If you're interested to becoming great negotiators, you need to be able to systematically compare your skills with others. So end of the commercial break. Let's move on to your next chapter. And your next chapter is on trust. Mm-hmm. Yep. Trust, currency, trust, the importance. You've already outlined that it belongs to the fundamentals, the essentials of negotiation. And I agree. We already had our first session with our students where we discussed what it is and why is it important. I'd love them to hear it from you, Keld. Yes. Mm-hmm. So what are the most effective trust building strategies?
I'm happy to share that in a second. Let me just explain for a second why trust is important and why trust is actually a very hardcore, tangible thing. We know for a fact that if trust is high in any kind of collaboration, our transaction cost will actually go down and our profit will increase. And opposite, if trust is low, transaction cost will go up and profit will decline. So let me just once again emphasize, trust is a tangible thing. It is something we can monetize, and it has a value in negotiation. So it's not only a fluffy thing because it should be there because it's nice. It actually is something that makes negotiators more successful.
Yes.
Now, how do you do that? Well, one way you don't do it is walking into a conference room and going up to you, Rema, pulling out my hand and say, Rema, I would love trust, transparency, honesty, and openness in our negotiation. And then you shake my hands and say, deal. That's not the way to do it, because obviously we can't verbally increase trust. Trust is coming from actions, right? Having said that, though, we often recommend that we actually put trust on the agenda. So you might have an agenda, who's who, do we have the mandate, what is the variable we want to negotiate, when are we supposed to end, and then have an item called trust as well. And some people I meet around the world is actually telling me that you can't do that. You know, trust is almost a area of taboo. We can't talk about trust. And I said, certainly we can, and we should. We should actually emphasize trust. We should actually say what happens if trust is declining during our session today. What can we do to improve trust? And please feel free to tell us if you feel that there's an issue with trustworthiness, you feel we're dishonest, or you feel that something is not being shared. So I created what I call a code of conduct, which is in the book, by the way. That is basically a code of conduct that we like to introduce to our client's counterpart. It's a small document, very easy. There's about 12 items on it, just saying how we want to conduct negotiation. And some of the items that we emphasize on that piece of paper is, for instance, we promise not to bluff and lie. And please tell us if you believe we do, and we expect the same from you. We want to tell the truth. We want to be open. We want to share that. So we're basically promoting it in writing. That doesn't guarantee that people are honest. But what I can see from using this for years is that when you and I as human beings are being reminded about something, there's a tendency that we actually stick to that rule more than before, right? Not that I want to spend time talking religion really here, but religion is actually important because in religion we have the golden rule, at least in the Christian world, but that goes in all major religions. It's just not called the golden rule, but it's there. The golden rule is, if I should translate very quickly, only do to others what you like others to do to you. Going back in time, religion was more important in most of the world than it is today. And whether you're religious is not really important right now, but the religion, part of the purpose of the religion was to try and help people being more honest and ethical and moral. And one of the problems today is that we may not always have an ethical and moral guideline. So one of the things, I don't know about you and your university, Remy, but what I see at university in the US is that a lot of business schools are reintroducing ethics and moral back on the schedule, because suddenly somebody realized, hey, ethics and moral is actually declining. And so is trust. It's actually declining. So we have to do something. I'm talking about this because our code of conduct is just a reminder. Hey, it's a good thing to be honest without being naive. It's a good thing not to lie. It's a good thing just to do something which in the real world actually makes sense. But we just have a tendency to forget about it. And what I often find is if I ask negotiators if they ever lie in negotiation, I meet some people who says, yes, I do. And I meet even more that says, no, I'm never lying, but I'm bluffing. And then I get really curious, Remy, because what is the big difference between lying and bluffing, really? I mean, you know, and people often say, well, I'm bluffing. I'm sitting with a supplier, and then I'm telling the supplier that he or she has an alternative supplier that is 12% cheaper, even though there is no alternative. And then I'm saying, that's not bluffing, that is lying, isn't it? You know, so it's a funny thing that outside negotiation, we call something a lie, but when we step into negotiation, we just rename it to bluff, and then it's kind of okay. And I had a mentor for many years who always told me, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you just said. So I'm not encouraging anybody to be naive, but I'm encouraging everybody not to lie. I really don't believe in lying. So that's connected to trust as well, because what happens if you catch your counterpart in lying? Trust is just removed completely, immediately. So yeah, think about that. Really important chapter in the book.
Yes, and it's detrimental to the economics of the deal, or it can be detrimental to the economics of the deal.
Yeah, yeah.
We triggered another sensible topic, which means we got a question from Tuzi. Maybe you could write us where you're from. It would be interesting to find out. What about negotiators who are meeting for the first time and have to arrive at a solution within a short time, where there has been no prior opportunity to build trust? What else other than trust should be glue holding the negotiation together? Great question.
Yeah, I would go out for lunch as the first thing. Even though we have limited time, I would sit down and negotiate over a meal, dinner, lunch, breakfast, whatever. I would try purposely to talk about something else than the actual negotiation. I would reveal something about myself as a human being. I have 3 kids. I live right here. My wife is doing this. This is a picture of my family. I would invite the counterpart to do the same. Back to what I said at the beginning of this show, Remy, negotiation is between human beings and people. If I have a relationship, I will trust you more. I will like you more. If you are just the head negotiator of a big corporation, I have no relationship to you, and I will definitely not trust you. I'm not trusting a company, I'm trusting an individual. So limited time, I would shortcut that by creating that environment. And why wouldn't you sit and negotiate over lunch? I mean, isn't that nice, instead of just sitting in a boring conference room? So that would be one of the ways, just to shortcut creating trust. I'm not saying, by the way, it will always work, because sometimes you just meet somebody you don't like, so then you fail, obviously.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Keld. We are currently with Felix, with my doctoral student. We are working on ethically ambiguous strategies. And one of the questions that we're asking ourselves right now is, how can we prevent them? How can we move others, or let's say inspire others to be ethical with us? Also, assuming, of course, that we want to pursue do exactly what you described, meaning, we want to build trust, we want to be trustworthy, come across as trustworthy, and so on. But we have no control of what the others would do to us. Yeah? So, what are the, from your perspective, from the top of your head, prevention strategy or protection strategies from unethical behavior?
That's a great question. I was almost. I was close to saying, when you figure it out, please let me know, because I'm very curious about that as well. It is easier, still difficult, but easier to change ourselves, right? But changing other people is basically impossible, isn't it? So what can we do to try and make an impact? Well, back to what I said earlier. I have found that the more we actually verbalize trust, relationship, ethics, moral, without killing it with words, if we actually verbalize it, put it down on the agenda, put it as part of the things we want to discuss, and we have something we call rules of the game. We have to agree on how to negotiate, as I said earlier. The more we actually focus on it in there, the higher we seem to be able to increase that part of it. Then we do something else. Was it Lenin that back said that trust is good, but control is better? Yes. I'm not necessarily agreeing with that statement, but one of the ways we can do it is that we sometimes build in a clause in the rule of the engagement, where we actually says that if the parties reach an agreement, they agree mutually to have an edit, a supervision of their background. So you would actually send in a supervision in each organization just to check that all the data and information that was shared was the correct one. That obviously prevent people from lying and being unethical and presenting wrong numbers, because they know if we're going to reach an agreement, we are going to be checked afterwards. So it's a little bit more a rough way of going to it. But for instance, we've been using that in major contracts and merger acquisitions very successfully. It's just kind of a judge. There will be a judge at one point that will go and check that whatever you said was actually correct. Compared to European football, when you have the system now, what is it called? The VAR system, where you have a recording and the judge can go and look at that. Basically the same thing in a negotiation.
All right. Yes. So Tuzi is from South Africa. I hope this answers your question. Thank you so much. And by the way, also to all others, listeners and viewers right now on different platforms, you guys are more than welcome to share your questions in the chat. We are very inclusive and look forward to receiving them from you. One comes from Boston directly, from Sherman. So to fulfill promises creates trust, one assumes. What does fulfilling a threat produce?
Well, first and foremost, I will say, if you have chosen to use a threat, you have to fulfill it. Otherwise, it is translated into bluff immediately, right? Everybody who got kids, I got kids. How many of you can actually admit that you've been threatening your kids with something and they're not going through with it? I'm doing that way too often. I'm supposed to be an expert in this field, but I fail miserably with my own kids. So, if you don't clean up the room, there'll be no ice cream, right? And then they don't clean up their room, and for whatever reason, they end up getting an ice cream anyway. That is obviously a threat that is not working. I'm doing terribly. I have to improve that myself, but that is the problem, because the next time you deliver a threat, and if you don't go through with that threat, obviously your counterpart will be sitting there thinking, yeah, whatever, he said that last time as well, and that's not going to happen. So fulfilling a threat actually just proves your point that you did what you said you were going to do. And if you said you're going to do it and the counterpart is not responding to that threat, well, you have to go through with it. Otherwise, you're putting yourself in a quite miserable spot.
All right. Sherman, all the best back to Boston. Thank you for your question. Let's move on with difficult negotiations. Yes, that's when they call us, right? That's when they write us emails, hey, it's about to escalate. It's super complex. We need help. We need support. Yeah? So there are, in my opinion, in my experience, there are two sources of complexity. One is, or let's say difficulties in negotiation. One is substance. The other one is relationship, which is ruined. Yeah? So how do you, Keld, question to you, how do you mend those negotiations? What do you do? How do you reduce complexity? How do you help people come to a yes when they are on the verge of yelling no?
Yeah. Well, you actually pointed it out. It really depends. Is it the substance? Is it the relationship? Is it the people? What is the main issue? What is the issue at hand that they can't deal with? If I should start just from one end, quite often I find it's people that's the problem. Not that they're incompetent or shouldn't be sitting there, but as I said a little bit earlier, sometimes we just meet somebody that we're not compatible with, right? So you're just meeting a counterpart that you don't like, they don't like you. That's just, they say blue, you say yellow. So one point we often begin is actually replacing one or several parties in the negotiation. And what I sometimes do is actually stepping in. If I'm joining the negotiation myself on behalf of a client, I actually step in and saying the following to the counterpart. You have to be very careful how you do it, though. But I might step in and say, with due respect of you, your team, and your organization, we do feel that person X in your team is standing in the way of the best possible outcome, both for you and your counterpart. So with due respect, we would kindly ask you to replace person X in your team. I can't stop right there because that's almost declaring a war, right? So I have to move on and then say, and by the way, if there's anybody in our team you would like to replace, please point to that person. And then they might point to a person, and that person have to step down. Could actually be me as well. Then I have to step down. But quite often, I would say more that than you think, it is actually a human issue. It's actually the people that find a way to move on. And just sometimes by replacing the individuals, you have a new person coming in and suddenly the whole game is just changing. Just back to European football again, just changing a player, not because he's necessarily tired, just replacing that player with another one could just change the whole energy in the game. So that is one way of doing it. Another way I typically do it is actually looking at what variable are they focusing on right now. Are they focusing on what I call a zero-sum variable? A zero-sum variable is actually something, obviously, that doesn't create mutual value. Price, let's just pick that one. Price does not create any value. If I am a supplier to you, Remy, and I increase my price, I'm winning, you're losing. If you are successful in making me decrease my price, I'm losing, you're winning. So price is a stupid variable to begin with at any point. I'm not saying you should negotiate it. I'm just saying you should negotiate it at the very end when you have talked about all other variables that may generate value. So quite often, besides the human thing I just talked about, we step in and look at variables. Is the order of the variables correct? Have we started with the wrong variables? Have we enough variables? Back to what I said earlier, we need to need to negotiate on more variables as well. So that's a more technical issue where we step in and look at that immediately. And quite often, and there's no magic in this, quite often we can solve a lot of issues just by trying to expand that pie. Very simple approach, really.
Wow, simple and so powerful. Thank you, Keld, for sharing it. And more towards the end of the book, you pick up the topic of negoeconomics, which we've already discussed. But you also describe, I think, your trademark, yes? The smartnership. Could you tell us a little bit more about it, what it means, how to pursue it, raise the appetite for the concluding chapters of your book?
Yeah. Smartnership is really partnership version 2.0. And the reason that we have developed Smartnership over the last 15 years is that I have too many times heard organizations, when I ask them, how do you negotiate? Well, we're negotiating partnerships. And then when you dive in and look at what they're really doing, they're just doing long-term zero-sum. So they're just repeatedly doing zero-sum with the same supplier, or the same client over and over again for 10 years. And when they've been doing it a long time, they call it partnership. And that's BS. That's not partnership. So back to the question about strategy. In our world, we have 3 levels of strategy choices. We have the zero sum, we have partnership, and we have smartnership. And smartnership is partnership added with negoeconomics, trust, expansion of variables, and a clear strategy. So you can basically just add those 4 items to partnership, and then you are in smartnership. So smartnership is really just focused on generating value, because where I'm coming from, commercial negotiation, it's very different in hostage negotiation and political negotiation, but commercial negotiation is about one thing really only, and that is to create value and distribute value. If you think about it, that's the reason organizations are negotiating with each other, to create value and distribute value. So when you want to do that, back to what I said earlier, long term, then you have to move into smartnership. So yeah, it's explained in detail what is into smartnership. It sounds very easy, and really it is, but then in reality it becomes difficult, because it requires that both parties know what to do, are prepared to do it, and knows exactly what common mutual target they're working towards.
Awesome. Thank you for a simple explanation of a complex topic. Let us spontaneously check the understanding, or check the frequency of smartnerships among our audience. If you guys believe that you have someone in your personal network or professional network at work that you are in a smartnership in, why don't you hit the like button? And give us some details in the comments. We'll pick up on them if time allows at the end. So hit the like button if you have a smartner. Is that a partner in a smartnership? Is that a smartner? Mm-hmm. If you have a smartner, hit the like button and tell us who it is and how you've built this relationship. And in the meantime, Keld, I'd love to ask you for an elevator pitch. So who is this book for? Who should buy it? And what will they learn from it?
What is funny is that I sometimes meet people that come to me and say, well, negotiation is something that people in a conference room in a company is doing. It's something diplomat is doing, and it's something politicians are doing. So it's not for me. And then I'm normally saying, not quite so, because you're right. Those groups you just explained are all negotiating, but are you having kids? Do you have a spouse? Do you have a boss? Do you have colleagues? Do you have a bank? Do you have a travel? Do you have a phone bill? Is there anything I just mentioned to you that you can relate to? And people obviously go, yes. Then I said, great, you are negotiating as well. Everybody is negotiating all the time. Through a very simple study, we identified that all of us, regardless what kind of job life we are in, or whether we're not working or whether we're doing, we have between 8,000 to 10,000 negotiations per year. I just repeat that, 8,000 to 10,000 negotiations per year. Those of you who have kids, just start counting. When you woke up this morning, I woke up this morning, I have 2 boys, and the first negotiation was, I don't want to wear that shirt to school today. There you go, bingo, first negotiation. My wife came up and she said, could you pick up the kids today? I said, I don't have time. I'm in a meeting. It says, what do you have? Well, there you go. Negotiation number 2. I promise you, before I left my family this morning, we've gone through perhaps 20 negotiations. And I have not even reached out to clients or done anything else at this point. So back to the question, who's the book for? Well, if you are breathing, it's for you, because everybody is negotiating. Having said that, and obviously, if you try to reach everybody, you're reaching nobody. So the book is written with a commercial target in mind. So it is a little bit more commercial orientated than it is private negotiation orientated, because we focus a lot on creating value. But we try to, both McGraw-Hill as the publisher and I, we really try to make the book live up to its title, Negotiation Essential. So it is really essentials. Whatever we need to do. Having said that, I just want to bring out a warning. This book is not enough. I mean, you can't sit down thinking, I need a book on negotiation, so I'm going to buy Negotiation Essentials, and, well, I got everything I need. Absolutely not. You need to buy and read other books on negotiations. And the same thing goes for other books as well. I quite often meet people who say, well, I read Getting to Yes 18 years ago, so I'm done. And I said, God, you're stupid. I mean, you just begun, right? Because first and foremost, it was 18 years ago. Secondly, it's just one book with one viewpoint. And no book on earth can cover everything around negotiation. And that goes for negotiation essentials either. So it can highlight and pinpoint some new thoughts that we've been trying, but are we diving into body language? No, we're not. Are we diving into a lot of other aspects that could be relevant? No, we are covering whatever we can cover in 280 pages.
180 pages it is. Thank you so much, Keld, for this pitch. It sounds super exciting. Is the book available already?
No, it's out October 24th. But I would recommend, if you have an interest, that you pre-order it wherever you buy your books right now, because we know already that the first edition is going to sell out, and then it's going to take a little bit of time before second edition is up and running. So please go and pre-order. You can do that basically everywhere right now.
All right, we got a couple of guys. Please make sure that you start looking for Negotiation Essentials by Keld Jensen, and you'll find out there. You'll find out so much more on strategy, trust, nego economics, partnership, and all the concepts that we've discussed. In the meantime, we've already gotten some more questions here in the chat. Wow. That's a highly interactive episode. So here we go. Shihab from Egypt. Keld, wonderful. You keep mentioning commercial negotiations, and you said that this is different than political or social negotiations. In my experience, the details are different, but the human dynamics are pretty close. What are your thoughts?
Completely agree. I mean, human dynamics are pretty close. Humans are humans, regardless what we are negotiating. Whether we are negotiating as part of a political treaty, whether we're sitting negotiating a big contract, or whether we're negotiating with our kids. The difference, as I would like to point out, is that some negotiations and types of negotiation are more irrational than others. If I should highlight one group, that would be political negotiations. I tend to shy away from political negotiation because they are highly irrational. It is not necessarily the best possible outcome that the parties are looking for. They're looking for the outcome, and I'm generalizing, they're looking for the outcome that makes them look good in front of the voters. So I've been advising political parties. I've been advising people in politics as well. And sometimes I just walk away shaking my head because it doesn't make sense. I mean, we have the best possible outcome right in front of us, but they leave it because it doesn't look right. The big difference between commercial negotiation, which is very tangible, is obviously the creation of value. Do you want to create value with your kids and your spouse? Absolutely. But it may not be in dollars or euros. It could be a different kind of value. So that is the big difference. But I completely agree with the comment that humans are humans, regardless what negotiation environment we're sitting in.
Great, thank you so much, Shihab. I hope it answers your questions. We have an ongoing discussion about negotiating with kids. So we're gonna use your expertise here to resolve it or to shed a new light on it. So Elaine says, never negotiate with kids. They are too combative. Then Tomasz explains, just turn it the other way around. Train the kids in negotiation skills. Negotiation at home will be really interesting. However, the teachers in your kids' school usually start complaining that your kids are too demanding. So, Keld, what's your view on negotiating with kids?
Well, I actually agree with what Thomas is saying, and I'm biased, but I don't understand why schools isn't starting to teach kids to negotiate. For many reasons. One of them is just dealing with conflicts with other kids, dealing with conflicts with teachers, dealing with conflicts with parents. It's a topic that I think we should start learning very early on. It's so important for our success in life in general. How do we deal with kids then? Well, when you have emotions involved in a negotiation, it's always become more complicated. So negotiating with your own kids, as I said earlier, is more challenging than negotiating with somebody else's, where you don't have the same emotional insight. But no, in general, yes, you should train your kids. I love the comments from Thomas. You should train your kids in negotiation, and you should negotiate with your kids. We try and challenge our kids to negotiate, and I'm sure the teachers at their school are not happy about it, but they have to challenge. Think back to what I said earlier. When a teacher says, well, you have to read this chapter for next week, you should ask the question, why? What's the purpose? What are we getting out of that? Could we do something else instead? And it's not a question about being a rebel or a terrorist. It's just, you have to inquire. What is the reason? What is the background? What does it mean to you if I do this? Start negotiating all the time. You may be thrown out of school, but you'll learn to negotiate.
So parents out there, you have to weigh it out. Yes, what is more important to you, to have a kid who is ready for the challenges of the future and a great negotiator, or a kid that is able to finish his or her education? All right, there's a huge compliment from Boston, from Sherman, who runs Blackwell University here. Another great episode. That's a compliment to you, Keld. Thank you for making it so great.
Thank you.
And it's still going on. Never negotiate with toddlers. All right, good. Almost last question. Let me see if we have something in the chat. Okay, that's a comment to a comment. Great negotiators, Keld. I always finish my episodes, discussions with experienced honored guests by asking them to point towards the inspiration, towards greatness that they've either encountered or know about, read about, be it contemporary or historical. Keld, who has it been for you?
It's actually the founder of the organization I'm heading today. It's a Swede by the name of Ivar Und. Unfortunately, he's not among us anymore. He founded the whole concept and the organization in 1976 in Stockholm, in Sweden. He was actually called the father of negotiation in Scandinavia. And if you listen closely to the year 1976, that was way before the program on negotiation at Harvard started. Harvard actually reached out to him very early on to ask if he wanted to collaborate, but he wanted to build his own stuff in Scandinavia. So he was the one that inspired me and made me understand how important negotiation really was. What happened was I was the CEO of a public tech company in Stockholm, and we hired him as a negotiation consultant. And I'm not exaggerating my story here. In 120 minutes, he moved me from unconsciously incompetent in negotiation to be consciously incompetent, which is a terrible wake-up call, because suddenly you realize that you don't know how to do what you thought you were good at. And that made me realize that, my God, there's so many people out there we can help that are doing it every day, but really don't know why. Some of them are good at it automatically, but a lot of them are not, because they don't know what they don't know. So that was back in 1998. So I would actually, he published a lot of books himself as well. I would actually name him as one of the biggest inspiration. He was a great negotiator himself as well. And really very early on, before we started to have all these books on the market and develop a lot of theory, he was very good at that. And think about it for a second. The theory on negotiation is actually not that old. The most known book of them all is actually Getting to Yes. And that was basically the kickoff for a whole institution on doing theory on negotiation. So it's not really much older than back to the late 70s.
Thank you so much, Keld. We're getting some questions about how to spell this name. If you could help us, Keld.
Sure. Ivar, I-W-A-R, that's his first name, Ivar, and then his last name is Und, U-N-T.
All right. I hope that helped, guys out there. We're almost there, but let me first of all announce something that I'm super grateful to you, Keld. Not only that you've shared your thoughts or opened a little bit of open up the secret of your upcoming books, but also I would like to mention that we will partner up in the organization of the Negotiation Challenge. Keld will support us within one of the rounds. So you guys, if you're inspired by him, so first of all, make sure that you pre-order his book, Negotiation Essentials. Yes, and then make sure that you apply it. You read it and apply it in our competition. It's called The Negotiation Challenge, and you will find it, more details you will find on our website, thenegotiationchallenge.org. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. Second thing is, this is probably going to be the last episode with bald bearded men. Yes. The previous one was also very similar with Phil Brown. Phil, hope you're doing well. Yes, bald bearded men. Maybe we should maybe we should change the name of this podcast. So Bold Bearded Men on Negotiation. Keld, thank you so much for being with us. I've genuinely enjoyed our conversation. Guys, be on the lookout for Keld's book. Make sure you register before time runs out for the negotiation challenge. And until the next time on the podcast on negotiation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.